This is the true account of the Leopard of Rudraprayag, a man-eating leopard that terrorized the Himalayan pilgrimage routes of northern India from 1918 to 1926. Over the course of 8 years, this single leopard killed more than 125 human beings, making it one of the most prolific man-eaters in recorded history. The story is remembered not only for the extraordinary number of victims, but for how completely this one animal paralyzed an entire region, disrupted ancient religious pilgrimages, and defied every attempt at capture, until the legendary hunter Jim Corbett finally tracked it down in a methodical campaign that would become the stuff of legend. The year 1918 found the mountain paths of Garhwal in northern India bustling with their eternal rhythm of pilgrimage. For over 1,000 years, devout Hindus had followed these ancient trails through the Himalayas to reach the sacred shrines of Kedarnath and Badrinath. The routes wound through some of the most spectacular and treacherous terrain on Earth, where snow-capped peaks pierced the sky and glacial rivers carved deep gorges through valleys thick with rhododendron and oak forests. Rudraprayag marked the convergence point where two mighty rivers, the Alaknanda and the Mandakini, joined in a sacred union. Here, at an elevation of nearly 2,000 feet above sea level, pilgrims traveling to either shrine would pass through this small town that served as both a spiritual way station and a vital supply point. The settlement clung to the steep hillsides above the confluence, its stone houses and temples connected by narrow paths that had been worn smooth by countless generations of faithful travelers. The pilgrimage season brought thousands of people through Rudraprayag and the surrounding villages each year. They came from the plains of northern India, walking for days or weeks to reach the high shrines. Many were elderly, having saved for years to make this journey. Others were families with children, or groups of friends united in their devotion. They carried simple belongings in cloth bundles, slept in dharamshalas and rest houses along the route, and depended on the local villagers for food, shelter, and guidance through the mountain passes. The local population had adapted their entire way of life to serve these pilgrims. Villages like Augustmuni, Gupkashi, and Gaurikund had grown up along the trails specifically to provide services to travelers. Shopkeepers sold supplies, guides offered their knowledge of the treacherous paths, and families opened their homes to provide meals and shelter. The pilgrim trade formed the backbone of the regional economy, and the mountain people took pride in their role as protectors and guides for those seeking spiritual fulfillment in the high places. But the mountains that drew pilgrims with their beauty and sanctity also harbored dangers that tested human courage and faith. Avalanches could bury entire groups without warning. Flash floods turned peaceful streams into raging torrents that swept away bridges and paths. The thin air at high altitude left many travelers gasping and weak. And in the forests that covered the lower slopes, wild animals moved through the shadows, following their own ancient patterns of hunting and survival. The troubles began gradually, almost imperceptibly, during the pilgrimage season of 1918. A few travelers reported unusual encounters with a leopard along the Kedarnath route. Unlike the typical behavior of these normally secretive cats, which avoided human contact whenever possible, this leopard seemed unusually bold. It had been spotted during daylight hours, moving along paths frequently used by pilgrims, showing no fear when confronted by groups of people. Local guides and villagers initially dismissed these reports as typical encounters with mountain wildlife. Leopards were common throughout the region, and occasional sightings were nothing unusual. The experienced mountain dwellers knew how to coexist with these predators, using fires, noise, and group travel to discourage any aggressive behavior. They advised pilgrims to travel in large groups, carry torches at night, and avoid camping in isolated spots where predators might be emboldened to approach. However, the nature of the encounters began to change as the summer progressed. The leopards started following groups of pilgrims, sometimes for miles, staying just visible enough to create unease, but not close enough to present an immediate threat. Villagers found fresh leopard tracks on main paths during morning hours, indicating that the animal was using human routes for its own travel rather than keeping to the forest trails that leopards typically preferred. Then came the first disappearance. A middle-aged pilgrim from a village near Delhi had been traveling with a small group toward Kedarnath. The group had stopped for the night at a rest house near Augustmuni, about 20 miles below Rudraprayag. The missing man had stepped outside the building during the evening to relieve himself and never returned. His companions searched the immediate area, calling his name and lighting torches, but found no trace of him. The next morning, they discovered a blood trail leading from behind the rest house into the dense forest. Following it for a short distance, they found scraps of clothing and clear evidence that something had dragged a human body into the undergrowth. The distinctive pug marks in the soft earth told the story clearly enough. A leopard had taken the pilgrim during the night, just yards from where his companions slept. This incident might have been written off as an isolated tragedy, the kind of unfortunate encounter that occasionally occurred when humans ventured into wild country. Leopards were known to occasionally attack humans under certain circumstances, particularly if they were old, injured, or defending cubs. The local authorities recorded the death and warned pilgrims to exercise extra caution, but life along the pilgrimage routes continued much as before. But within 2 weeks, another pilgrim vanished under nearly identical circumstances. This time, the victim was a young woman traveling with her family to Badrinath. She had been walking at the rear of their group during the late afternoon when they passed through a forested section of trail near the village of Guptkashi. Her brother, walking ahead of her, realized she was no longer following and turned back to look for her. He found only her water pot lying beside the path and fresh leopard tracks in the dust. A search party from the village located her body the following day, dragged into thick undergrowth about 100 yards from where she had disappeared. The leopard had killed her quickly with a bite to the neck, in the typical manner of these cats, but it had consumed very little of the body before abandoning it. This pattern would become grimly familiar in the months to come. As autumn gave way to winter in 1918, reports of leopard attacks became more frequent and more disturbing. The cat was no longer content to pick off isolated individuals who strayed from their groups. It began stalking entire parties of pilgrims, following them for hours or even days before selecting a victim. Sometimes it would attack during the day, rushing out of thick cover to seize someone from the middle of a group before disappearing back into the forest with its prey. The leopard displayed an uncanny ability to identify the most vulnerable members of any group. It targeted the elderly, the sick, women traveling with small children, and anyone who showed signs of fatigue or weakness. But it also took strong, healthy adults when the opportunity presented itself. No one could predict when or where it would strike next, which created a climate of terror that spread far beyond the immediate areas where attacks occurred. Word of the man-eating leopard traveled quickly along the pilgrimage routes, carried by frightened survivors and local villagers. The stories grew in the telling, as such stories do, but the basic facts remained horrifyingly consistent. A single leopard was systematically hunting human beings along the sacred paths to Kedarnath and Badrinath. It showed no fear of fire, noise, or groups of people. It could strike in broad daylight or complete darkness with equal efficiency. And it seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to avoid the traps, snares, and hunting parties sent out to destroy it. The local authorities organized their first serious effort to kill the leopard in the winter of 1918. A team of experienced hunters from the region, armed with rifles and accompanied by dogs, spent several weeks combing the forests around Rudraprayag and the surrounding villages. They found numerous tracks and kill sites, but the leopard seemed to vanish whenever they drew close. On 2 occasions, they thought they had cornered it in dense undergrowth, only to discover that it had somehow slipped away without a trace. During this same period, the attacks continued with relentless regularity. Every few days brought news of another victim. A government official traveling to inspect the pilgrimage facilities was taken from his camp near Gorakund. An elderly sadhu walking alone to Kedarnath disappeared between 2 villages, leaving only his walking stick and a few drops of blood on the trail. A group of merchants carrying supplies to the mountain settlements lost one of their number when he stepped away from their campfire to check on their pack animals. The leopard's hunting territory seemed to expand as its confidence grew. Attacks were reported from villages as far apart as Tilwara in the south and Kedarnath itself in the north, a distance of over 30 miles of mountain terrain. This suggested that either multiple leopards were involved, which local experts doubted, or that a single animal was covering an enormous range in its search for human prey. By the spring of 1919, the man-eating leopard had fundamentally changed life in the region. The pilgrimage that had continued uninterrupted for centuries began to face serious disruption. Many pilgrims, hearing the stories of the man-eater, chose to postpone their journeys or abandon them altogether. Those who did venture onto the mountain paths traveled in large, heavily armed groups and avoided camping in the open whenever possible. The economic impact on the local communities was severe. Villages that depended on pilgrim trade saw their income drop dramatically as fewer travelers passed through. Guides found themselves unemployed as pilgrims chose to stay home rather than risk encountering the leopard. Shopkeepers who sold supplies to travelers watched their businesses decline. The entire regional economy, built around the sacred journey to the high shrines, began to crumble under the weight of fear. Local government officials found themselves facing an unprecedented crisis. The pilgrimage routes represented not just economic lifelines for the mountain communities, but also important cultural and religious traditions that had sustained the region for generations. The idea that a single animal could bring this ancient system to a halt was almost unthinkable, yet that was exactly what was happening. Efforts to protect pilgrims became increasingly elaborate and expensive. Armed guards were stationed at key points along the routes. Rest houses were fortified with higher walls and stronger doors. Oil lamps were kept burning all night at regular intervals along the main path. But none of these measures seemed to deter the leopard, which continued to find opportunities to strike at unwary travelers. The cat displayed a level of cunning that amazed and frustrated those trying to protect against it. It learned to avoid the guarded rest houses and well-lit areas, instead targeting pilgrims during the day when they felt safest. It began attacking people who strayed even short distances from the main paths, whether to gather firewood, collect water, or answer calls of nature. It seemed to understand that humans were most vulnerable when they were alone and distracted. Religious leaders struggled to provide guidance to their followers about whether to continue the pilgrimages despite the danger. Some argued that true devotion required accepting the risks and trusting in divine protection. Others counseled postponing the journey until the threat had passed. This spiritual dimension added another layer of complexity to what was already a difficult situation for local authorities to manage. As more attacks occurred, a clear pattern began to emerge in the leopard's hunting behavior. Unlike typical leopard predation, which usually involved ambushing prey from concealment and killing quickly, this animal had developed techniques specifically adapted for hunting humans. It studied human behavior and exploited weaknesses in ways that suggested a level of intelligence that deeply disturbed those who investigated its kills. The leopard had learned that humans were most vulnerable during certain daily routines. Early morning was a favored hunting time, when people stepped outside to wash or relieve themselves before the day's journey began. The cat would position itself near rest houses and camping areas during the night, then wait for someone to venture outside alone when dawn approached. Another common attack pattern involved following groups of pilgrims along the trail and waiting for someone to fall behind or separate from the main party. The leopard would shadow a group for hours, sometimes for an entire day, studying their movements and looking for the right moment to strike. Survivors reported seeing the cat moving parallel to their path through the forest, just visible enough to create terror but staying out of range of any weapons they might carry. The leopard also developed techniques for attacking people inside buildings and supposedly secure areas. It learned to climb onto roofs and drop down into courtyards where pilgrims slept. On several occasions, it broke through doors or windows to reach victims inside rest houses. These indoor attacks were particularly terrorizing because they occurred in places where people felt they should be safe from wild animals. Physical evidence from attack sites revealed that the leopard was an exceptionally large and powerful animal. Its pug marks measured nearly 4 inches across, indicating a cat that probably weighed over 150 pounds. Claw marks on trees and buildings showed that it possessed extraordinary climbing ability, even for a leopard. And the ease with which it carried away adult human victims demonstrated strength that impressed even experienced hunters familiar with leopard capabilities. The leopard's killing technique was efficient and deadly. Like all cats, it killed by crushing the neck vertebrae with a powerful bite, causing almost instantaneous death. This mercy was small comfort to those who lived in fear of encountering it, but it did mean that victims suffered very little. The cat typically dragged its prey a short distance into heavy cover before feeding, consuming what it wanted and then abandoning the remains. One of the most disturbing aspects of the leopard's behavior was its apparent lack of interest in consuming entire human bodies. Unlike typical man-eating cats, which usually ate their kills completely before seeking new prey, this leopard often ate very little before moving on to hunt again. This suggested that it was killing for reasons beyond simple hunger, though wildlife experts could only speculate about what might drive such behavior. The communities along the pilgrimage routes responded to the leopard threat with a combination of traditional protective measures and desperate innovation. Villages that had coexisted peacefully with wildlife for generations found themselves implementing security procedures that would have seemed unthinkable just a few years earlier. Night watches became universal throughout the region. Every village organized teams of men to patrol the streets and paths during the hours of darkness, carrying lanterns, drums, and whatever weapons they could find. These patrols served both to spot the leopard if it approached and to provide psychological comfort to frightened residents who could hear the sounds of the watch making their rounds. Houses and public buildings were modified to provide better protection against the leopard's climbing ability. Walls were built higher, Windows were barred, and doors were reinforced with metal fittings. Many families moved their sleeping areas away from ground floor rooms, reasoning that the leopard would be less likely to reach them on upper floors. Some villages constructed communal shelters where residents could gather during the most dangerous hours. The local people also turned to spiritual measures for protection. Temples throughout the region held special prayers asking for divine intervention to stop the killings. Religious ceremonies were performed to appease whatever forces might be driving the leopard to hunt humans. Some villagers believed that the man-eater was not a normal animal at all, but rather a supernatural being sent to punish the community for some collective sin. Traditional hunting techniques were adapted and intensified in efforts to kill the leopard. Villagers set snares along known travel routes, built deadfall traps near water sources, and organized massive drives attempting to corner the cat in confined areas. But the leopard seemed to possess an uncanny ability to detect and avoid these efforts, leading some people to conclude that it truly was supernatural in nature. Communication networks developed to spread warnings about leopard sightings and attacks as quickly as possible. Villages established systems of signal fires and horn calls that could alert neighboring communities when the man-eater was spotted in their area. Runners carried messages between settlements, warning people to take extra precautions when the leopard was known to be active in their vicinity. As the death toll mounted through 1919 and into 1920, the colonial government in northern India began to take serious notice of the situation in Garhwal. What had initially appeared to be a local wildlife problem was becoming a significant administrative challenge with implications for public safety, economic stability, and civil order in an important region. The first official response involved sending a team of forest officers to assess the situation and recommend solutions. These officials interviewed survivors of leopard attacks, examined kill sites, and consulted with local experts about the animal's behavior. Their report confirmed that the attacks were indeed the work of a single leopard and recommended immediate action to eliminate the threat. A bounty was placed on the leopard's head, initially set at 500 rupees, which was a substantial sum for the time. This reward was intended to encourage local hunters and professional shikaris to intensify their efforts to kill the man-eater. The bounty was widely publicized throughout northern India, attracting hunters from considerable distances who hoped to claim the prize. Professional hunters began arriving in the region, bringing modern rifles, experienced tracking skills, and reputations earned hunting dangerous game throughout the subcontinent. Some were British officers with years of experience in Indian forests. Others were Indian shikaris, whose families had been hunting tigers and leopards for generations. All were confident that they could succeed where local efforts had failed. But the leopard continued to elude every attempt at elimination. Professional hunters who had successfully taken dozens of man-eating tigers found themselves outmaneuvered by this single leopard. Some spent weeks in the forests around Rudraprayag without even glimpsing their quarry. Others reported near misses where they briefly saw the leopard, but could not get a clear shot before it vanished into thick cover. The bounty was increased several times as frustration mounted. By 1921, the reward for killing the leopard of Rudraprayag had reached 1,000 rupees, making it one of the highest bounties ever offered for a single animal in India. But even this substantial sum failed to produce results, as hunter after hunter returned home empty-handed after weeks of fruitless pursuit. As rational efforts to eliminate the leopard continued to fail, supernatural explanations for its behavior began to gain credence among the local population. The animal's apparent immunity to bullets, traps, and poison led many people to conclude that they were dealing with something beyond normal leopard capabilities. Stories circulated about the leopard's supposed magical powers. Some claimed it could become invisible at will, explaining how it managed to approach victims undetected and escape from hunters who seemed to have it cornered. Others believed it could take human form when necessary, allowing it to walk through villages unrecognized while scouting for future victims. Religious explanations also emerged for the leopard's behavior. Some villagers believed it was an agent of divine punishment, sent to test their faith or punish them for some collective transgression. Others thought it might be the reincarnation of a human being who had died violently and returned to seek revenge on the living. These spiritual interpretations made the practical task of hunting the animal even more complicated, as some people became reluctant to participate in efforts that might anger supernatural forces. Local shamans and holy men offered various theories about the leopard's nature and suggested ritual solutions to the problem. Some performed elaborate ceremonies designed to banish evil spirits from the region. Others recommended specific prayers and offerings that might appease whatever forces were driving the leopard to hunt humans. While these spiritual responses provided psychological comfort to frightened communities, they did nothing to stop the continuing attacks. The supernatural reputation of the Leopard of Rudraprayag spread far beyond the immediate region where it hunted. Newspapers throughout India carried stories about the man-eater that could not be killed, and these accounts often emphasized the mysterious aspects of its behavior. The leopard became a subject of fascination for people who lived hundreds of miles away and would never visit the Himalayan pilgrimage routes. This growing legend had practical consequences for efforts to eliminate the threat. Some potential hunters were deterred by stories of the leopard's supernatural powers, reasoning that normal hunting methods would be ineffective against such a creature. Others came to the region specifically because they wanted to test themselves against what was being described as an almost mythical adversary. By 1922, the Leopard of Rudraprayag had been killing humans for 4 years, and its reputation had grown to legendary proportions. The death toll had passed 50 confirmed kills, making it one of the most prolific man-eaters in recorded history. Each new attack reinforced the growing belief that this was no ordinary animal, but something truly exceptional in its cunning and deadly efficiency. The leopard's hunting territory had expanded to cover virtually the entire network of pilgrimage routes in the region. Attacks were reported from villages separated by dozens of miles of mountain terrain, suggesting that the cat was covering enormous distances in its search for human prey. This mobility made it nearly impossible for hunters to predict where it might appear next or to establish effective ambush sites. Seasonal patterns began to emerge in the leopard's behavior. It was most active during the pilgrimage seasons when large numbers of travelers were moving through its territory. During winter months, when few pilgrims ventured onto the mountain paths, attacks decreased significantly. This suggested that the leopard was specifically targeting pilgrims rather than just hunting humans in general, though it also took local villagers when opportunities presented themselves. The economic disruption caused by the man-eater had become severe. Pilgrimage traffic had dropped to a fraction of its normal levels, devastating communities that depended on religious tourism for their survival. Many businesses had closed permanently, and families had left the region entirely to escape both the direct threat of the leopard and the economic hardship caused by its presence. Government officials were under increasing pressure to find a solution to what had become a major public relations disaster. The inability to eliminate a single leopard was being seen as evidence of administrative incompetence and was damaging British prestige in the region. Local politicians demanded action, and newspapers in major cities regularly reported on the continuing failure to stop the killings. Multiple hunting expeditions were organized during this period, involving dozens of professional hunters, forest officers, and local guides. These efforts included some of the most experienced big game hunters in India, men who had successfully eliminated other man-eating cats. But the Leopard of Rudraprayag continued to evade every attempt at elimination, seemingly growing bolder and more confident with each passing month. In 1925, after 7 years of unsuccessful efforts to eliminate the Leopard of Rudraprayag, government officials decided to approach Jim Corbett, who had already established a reputation as one of India's most skilled hunters of man-eating cats. Corbett had successfully eliminated several notorious man-eaters, including tigers that had killed hundreds of people, and his methods were known to be both effective and persistent. James Edward Corbett was born in Nainital in 1875 and had grown up in the forests of northern India. His childhood among the hills had given him an intimate knowledge of wildlife behavior and tracking skills that few hunters could match. Unlike many British officials who hunted for sport, Corbett focused specifically on man-eaters and problem animals that posed threats to local communities. He had already eliminated the man-eating tigers of Champawat and Mohan, earning the gratitude of thousands of people who lived in fear of these predators. The request for Corbett's assistance came from the highest levels of the colonial administration. Officials who had watched dozens of professional hunters fail against the Leopard of Rudraprayag were willing to try any approach that might succeed. Corbett's reputation for patience, woodcraft, and understanding of predator behavior made him seem like the best remaining hope for ending the reign of terror. Corbett accepted the challenge, though he was well aware of the difficulties he would face. The leopard had survived 7 years of intensive hunting pressure, which meant it was either extraordinarily lucky or extraordinarily intelligent. The terrain around Rudraprayag was ideally suited for a cat that wanted to avoid human contact, with thousands of acres of dense forest, rocky gorges, and cave systems that could provide perfect hiding places. Before beginning his hunt, Corbett spent considerable time gathering information about the leopard's behavior patterns. He interviewed survivors of attacks, examined kill sites, and studied the failed efforts of previous hunters. This research convinced him that he was dealing with an exceptional animal that had learned to avoid the traditional methods used to hunt man-eating cats. The leopard's apparent ability to detect and avoid baited kills was particularly puzzling. Previous hunters had used every type of bait imaginable, from domestic animals to human corpses, but the leopard had never been drawn to these offerings. This suggested either that it was feeding well on wild prey and did not need to take baits, or that it had learned to associate baited kills with human hunters and avoided them accordingly. Corbett's approach to hunting the leopard of Rudraprayag differed significantly from the methods employed by previous hunters. Instead of relying on baited kills or chance encounters, he decided to study the animal's behavior patterns systematically and wait for opportunities to ambush it along its regular travel route. His first step was to map the leopard's territory as precisely as possible. By plotting the locations of every known attack over the previous 7 years, Corbett identified patterns in the cat's movements that had not been apparent to earlier hunters. The leopard seemed to follow regular circuits through its territory, visiting certain areas on predictable schedules that corresponded to seasonal movements of wild prey and pilgrim traffic. Corbett also paid careful attention to the times when attacks occurred. While the leopard was capable of hunting at any hour, it showed clear preferences for certain periods of the day when lighting conditions and human behavior patterns created optimal hunting opportunities. Dawn and dusk were particularly dangerous times when people were moving about, but visibility was limited. Unlike previous hunters who had tried to track the leopard directly through the forest, Corbett decided to focus on areas where the cat was most likely to appear. He identified natural travel corridors, water sources, and feeding areas that any leopard in the region would need to use regularly. By watching these key locations, he hoped to eventually encounter the man-eater when it was following its normal routines. The hunter established a series of observation posts at strategic locations throughout the leopard's territory. These positions were carefully chosen to provide good visibility of likely approach routes while offering concealment for the hunter. Corbett built simple platforms in large trees, constructed blinds among rocks and vegetation, and modified existing buildings to create shooting positions. Patience was the cornerstone of Corbett's strategy. He was prepared to spend weeks or even months waiting for the right opportunity, rather than rushing into hasty encounters that might alert the leopard to his presence. This approach required enormous self-discipline, as he often had to remain motionless and silent for hours at a time while watching for signs of the cat. Corbett's hunt for the leopard of Rudraprayag began in earnest during the spring of 1926. He established his base camp in a forest rest house near Rudraprayag itself, positioning himself at the center of the leopard's territory. From this location, he could respond quickly to reports of fresh attacks or sightings while maintaining his systematic watch of key areas. The early weeks of the hunt proved as frustrating as the efforts of previous hunters. Despite spending long hours at carefully chosen observation posts, Corbett saw no sign of the leopard. He found plenty of evidence of the cat's presence, including fresh tracks, claw marks on trees, and scent marking, but the animal itself remained invisible. During this period, the leopard continued its attacks with undiminished frequency. Every few days brought news of another victim, and Corbett would rush to examine the fresh kill site for clues about the cat's current behavior. These investigations revealed that the leopard was maintaining its exceptionally cautious approach to hunting, taking victims quickly and efficiently before disappearing into areas where tracking was virtually impossible. Corbett began to understand why so many previous hunters had failed. The leopard had learned to avoid any area where humans were actively hunting for it. It seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to detect when hunters were present and would simply relocate to different parts of its territory until the threat passed. This behavior indicated a level of intelligence that was remarkable even for leopards, which are among the most cunning of all predators. The hunter modified his strategy to account for this exceptional wariness. Instead of trying to hunt the leopard actively, he decided to make himself invisible and wait for the cat to come to him. This meant selecting observation posts that offered good concealment and remaining completely motionless for extended periods, sometimes for entire days and nights. Weather conditions added another layer of difficulty to the hunt. The spring season in the Himalayas brought frequent rain showers that washed away tracks and made silent movement through the forest nearly impossible. Mist and fog often reduced visibility to just a few yards, creating conditions where the leopard could approach unseen even in daylight. These factors favored the cat, which was perfectly adapted to hunting in poor visibility. After weeks of unsuccessful attempts to encounter the leopard through mobile hunting, Corbett decided to establish a permanent observation post at a location where he believed the cat would eventually appear. He chose a position overlooking a small clearing near a stream, where several game trails converged and where the leopard had been seen on multiple occasions by local villagers. The site was about 3 miles from Rudraprayag, nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forest. A large fig tree growing beside the stream provided an ideal platform for an observation post. Corbett constructed a simple mashan, or hunting platform, about 20 feet above the ground in the main fork of the tree. From this position, he could see the entire clearing and several approach routes while remaining completely concealed from below. The machan was built with extreme care to avoid creating any signs that might alert the leopard to human presence. Corbett used only natural materials found in the immediate area, binding them together with rope rather than nails that might create unusual sounds. The platform was large enough for him to lie prone comfortably for hours, but small enough to remain hidden among the tree's branches and leaves. Supplies for the stakeout were carefully planned to minimize any disturbance to the area. Corbett brought enough food and water to remain in position for several days without leaving the mashan. He avoided any items with strong scents that might alert the leopard to his presence. Even his clothing was chosen to blend with the natural colors of the forest and to move silently when necessary. The hunter established a routine that would allow him to maintain his watch for extended periods while remaining alert and ready to shoot. He would climb to the machan before dawn and remain there until well after dark, scanning the clearing and surrounding forest for any sign of movement. During the hottest part of the day, when animal activity was minimal, he would rest while maintaining a visual watch of the area. Communication with his base camp was arranged through a system of signals that would not alert the leopard to unusual activity in the area. A local guide would approach the observation site at predetermined times to check on Corbett's status and provide fresh supplies if needed. These visits were timed to coincide with periods when the leopard was least likely to be active in the immediate vicinity. The stakeout began with several days of complete inactivity. Corbett saw plenty of normal forest wildlife from his perch in the fig tree, including several species of deer, wild boar, and various birds, but no sign of the leopard. The clearing seemed to be a regular gathering place for animals seeking water and the salt deposits found near the stream, but the man-eater was not among them. The physical demands of remaining motionless for hours at a time proved challenging even for an experienced hunter like Corbett. The machan was comfortable enough for short periods, but became increasingly cramped during extended watches. Muscles stiffened from maintaining the same position, and the constant alertness required to watch for the leopard was mentally exhausting. Weather conditions during the early days of the stakeout were favorable for observation. Clear skies provided good visibility, and gentle breezes carried sounds from throughout the surrounding forest. Corbett could hear the normal sounds of wildlife activity and began to learn the acoustic patterns of the area, knowledge that would help him detect anything unusual. On the third day of the stakeout, Corbett found fresh leopard tracks beside the stream, indicating that the cat had visited the clearing during the night while he was away from his post. The tracks were large and distinct, matching the measurements taken from previous kill sites, confirming that this was indeed the man-eater. The discovery proved that Corbett had chosen his location correctly, but also demonstrated the leopard's nocturnal activity pattern. The knowledge that the leopard was using the area regularly intensified Corbett's focus during subsequent watches. He began arriving at the machan even earlier each morning and staying later into the night, hoping to catch the cat during one of its visits to the clearing. The extended hours increased the physical strain of the stakeout, but also improved his chances of finally encountering his quarry. Local villagers continued to report leopard attacks from other parts of the territory during this period, confirming that the cat was maintaining its regular hunting activities while somehow avoiding Corbett's observation post. These reports were both frustrating and encouraging, as they proved the leopard was still active in the region, but also demonstrated its remarkable ability to avoid areas where hunters might be waiting. On the evening of the fourth day, as shadows began to lengthen across the clearing, Corbett finally glimpsed his quarry. The leopard appeared at the edge of the forest like a golden ghost, moving with the fluid grace that made these cats such efficient predators. It paused at the tree line, scanning the clearing with the careful attention of an animal that had survived years of hunting pressure. The cat was magnificent, larger than most leopards Corbett had encountered, with a coat marked by perfectly defined rosettes that provided ideal camouflage in the dappled forest light. Its movements displayed the confident power of a predator at the peak of its abilities, showing no signs of age or injury that might explain its turn to man-eating. This was simply an exceptional leopard that had learned to hunt the most dangerous prey available in its territory. For several minutes, the leopard remained at the forest edge, apparently testing the wind for any scent that might indicate danger. Its head moved constantly, ears twitching at every sound, eyes scanning every shadow in the clearing. The animal's extreme caution was evident in every movement, explaining how it had managed to avoid so many previous hunters. Corbett remained absolutely motionless in his machan, knowing that any movement might alert the leopard to his presence and end his opportunity. The range was still too great for a certain kill shot, and he needed the cat to move closer to the base of his tree before attempting to. The minutes seemed to stretch endlessly as predator and hunter waited, each following instincts honed by years of experience. Slowly, the leopard began to move into the clearing, following a route that would bring it within easy rifle range of Corbett's position. Its movements were deliberate and careful, pausing frequently to test the air and listen for any sounds that might indicate danger. The cat's wariness was extraordinary, even for a leopard, suggesting that it had learned to associate human scent with mortal danger. As the leopard approached the stream to drink, Corbett carefully positioned his rifle and began to take aim. The light was beginning to fade, making precise shot placement more difficult, but the range was now ideal for a clean kill. Everything depended on his ability to make a perfect shot, as a wounded leopard would almost certainly escape into the thick forest, where tracking would be impossible. The leopard reached the stream and lowered its head to drink, presenting Corbett with the perfect opportunity for a shot. The cat was now less than 50 yards from the base of the fig tree, well within range for a certain kill. Its position offered a clear view of the vital organs, and the animal was stationary enough for precise aim despite the failing light. Corbett drew a careful bead on the leopard's shoulder, aiming for the heart and lungs to ensure an immediate kill. His finger tightened on the trigger as he controlled his breathing and steadied the rifle against the solid support of the tree branch. Years of hunting experience had prepared him for this moment, and he felt the calm confidence that came with knowing exactly what needed to be done. The rifle shot shattered the evening quiet of the forest, echoing off the surrounding hills and sending every bird and animal in the area into panicked flight. The leopard spun at the impact of the bullet, let out a single coughing roar, and collapsed beside the stream. The long hunt for the man-eater of Rudraprayag was finally over. Corbett remained in his machan for several more minutes, watching for any sign of movement from the fallen leopard. Experience had taught him that wounded cats could be extremely dangerous, capable of sudden attacks even when apparently dead. Only when he was completely certain that the animal was not moving did he climb down from the tree and approach the kill site. The leopard was indeed dead, killed instantly by a bullet that had passed through its heart. It was a male, fully mature, and in excellent physical condition despite its advanced age. The cat measured over 7 feet from nose to tail tip, and probably weighed close to 150 pounds, making it an exceptionally large leopard even by Himalayan standards. There was no obvious injury or deformity that might explain its turn to man-eating. As darkness fell over the forest, Corbett prepared to transport the leopard's body back to Rudraprayag. The successful conclusion of the hunt would need to be verified by local officials and witnessed by the people who had lived in terror of this animal for 8 long years. The reign of the Leopard of Rudraprayag was finally ended. Aftermath and recognition. News of the leopard's death spread quickly throughout the region, carried by runners and signal fires to villages that had lived in fear for nearly a decade. The response was immediate and overwhelming, as hundreds of people converged on Rudraprayag to see the body of the man-eater that had terrorized their communities for so long. Many came simply to confirm that the threat was truly ended, while others wanted to witness the end of what had become a legendary ordeal. The leopard's body was displayed in the town square of Rudraprayag, where it was examined by officials, measured by naturalists, and viewed by countless local residents who had never dared hope they would see the day when the man-eater was finally eliminated. The animal's impressive size and perfect physical condition surprised many observers who had expected to find an old or injured cat that had turned to human prey out of necessity. Corbett was honored by both local communities and government officials for accomplishing what so many other hunters had failed to achieve. The gratitude of the mountain people was particularly meaningful to him, as he understood the suffering the leopard had caused and the economic damage it had inflicted on communities that depended on pilgrimage traffic for their survival. An official count of the leopard's victims was compiled from government records and local accounts, revealing that the animal had killed at least 125 people over its 8-year reign of terror. This made it one of the most prolific man-eaters in recorded history, surpassing even some of the notorious man-eating tigers that terrorized other parts of India. The true death toll was probably higher, as some attacks in remote areas may never have been officially recorded. The successful elimination of the leopard had immediate practical effects throughout the region. Pilgrimage traffic began to return to normal levels almost immediately, as word spread that the threat had been eliminated. Villages that had suffered economically during the years of terror began to recover as religious tourists once again felt safe traveling the ancient routes to Kedarnath and Badrinath. The story of the Leopard of Rudraprayag became part of the folklore of the region, joining the many legends associated with the sacred pilgrimage routes. But unlike mythical tales of gods and demons, this story was grounded in documented historical fact, making it all the more remarkable for the communities that had lived through the ordeal. The case of the Leopard of Rudraprayag provided valuable insights into the behavior of man-eating predators and the challenges of eliminating such animals once they have established regular hunting patterns. The leopard's exceptional intelligence and adaptability demonstrated that some individual animals are capable of learning and behavioral modification that goes far beyond what is typical for their species. Wildlife experts who studied the case were particularly interested in the leopard's ability to avoid traditional hunting methods that had proven effective against other man-eaters. Its apparent immunity to baited kills, its skill at detecting and avoiding hunters, and its systematic approach to selecting victims all suggested a level of learning and adaptation that was remarkable even for leopards, which are among the most intelligent of the big cats. The economic and social disruption caused by a single animal highlighted the vulnerability of communities that depend on tourism and traditional ways of life. The leopard's impact extended far beyond its direct victims to affect thousands of people whose livelihoods were connected to the pilgrimage route. This broader impact demonstrated how wildlife conflicts can have consequences that reach throughout entire regional economies. The success of Corbett's patient, methodical approach to hunting the leopard validated his philosophy that understanding animal behavior was more important than simply possessing superior weapons or tracking skills. His willingness to spend weeks observing and waiting, rather than rushing into direct confrontation, proved to be the key to success where more aggressive hunting methods had failed. The story also illustrated the important role that individual hunters could play in resolving human-wildlife conflicts that posed serious threats to local communities. While modern conservation efforts rightly emphasize protecting wildlife and minimizing conflicts, the case of the Leopard of Rudraprayag demonstrated that sometimes direct intervention is necessary to protect human life and community welfare. The legend of the man-eater became an important part of Jim Corbett's reputation as India's premier hunter of problem wildlife. His success against this particularly challenging adversary enhanced his status among both government officials and local communities, leading to requests for assistance with other man-eating cats throughout northern India. The years when the Leopard of Rudraprayag terrorized the Himalayan pilgrimage routes represented a unique period in the history of human-wildlife relationships in colonial India. The early 20th century was a time when traditional ways of life were being disrupted by modern administrative systems, but when wildlife populations were still large enough to include individual animals capable of causing significant problems for human communities. The pilgrimage routes themselves represented an ancient system of religious travel that had remained essentially unchanged for centuries before the leopard's appearance. The idea that a single animal could disrupt this established pattern was almost unthinkable to people whose families had been making these journeys for generations. The psychological impact of the threat was therefore magnified by its assault on cultural traditions that seemed permanent and unalterable. Colonial administrative systems were not well equipped to deal with wildlife problems of this magnitude and persistence. While the government could offer bounties and organize hunting expeditions, the day-to-day management of the crisis fell largely to local communities that lacked the resources and expertise needed to eliminate such a cunning adversary. This highlighted the limitations of colonial administration in remote mountain regions. The role of superstition and folklore in shaping community responses to the leopard revealed the continued importance of traditional beliefs in areas where modern scientific understanding had not yet fully penetrated. The leopard's apparent supernatural abilities seemed to confirm ancient stories about the power of wild animals and the dangers of disturbing natural balances. The eventual success of a hunter working essentially alone, using methods based on woodcraft and animal behavior rather than advanced technology or large-scale organization, suggested that traditional skills remained relevant even in an age of increasing modernization. Corbett's approach represented a blend of inherited knowledge and scientific observation that proved more effective than purely modern hunting techniques. The story of the Leopard of Rudraprayag stands as one of the most remarkable accounts of human-wildlife conflict in recorded history. For 8 years, from 1918 to 1926, a single leopard transformed life in an entire region of the Indian Himalayas, killing more than 125 people and disrupting ancient pilgrimage traditions that had endured for centuries. The animal's exceptional intelligence, adaptability, and hunting prowess made it nearly invulnerable to conventional elimination efforts and created a legend that persisted long after its death. The leopard's impact extended far beyond its direct victims to affect thousands of people whose lives were connected to the pilgrimage routes. Entire communities suffered economic hardship as religious tourism declined, and traditional ways of life were disrupted by the constant threat of attack. The psychological trauma of living under such conditions created lasting changes in how local people related to the wildlife that shared their mountain environment. The failure of numerous professional hunters to eliminate the leopard demonstrated that exceptional individual animals can sometimes develop capabilities that far exceed the normal range of their species. This particular leopard's ability to learn from experience, adapt to hunting pressure, and systematically exploit human vulnerabilities suggested a level of intelligence that challenged conventional understanding of predator behavior. Jim Corbett's eventual success in eliminating the man-eater validated the importance of patience, observation, and deep understanding of animal behavior in resolving such conflicts. His methodical approach, based on months of careful study and strategic planning, proved more effective than the aggressive hunting tactics employed by his predecessors. The success established Corbett's reputation as India's foremost hunter of man-eating cats and demonstrated the continued relevance of traditional woodcraft skills. The legacy of the Leopard of Rudraprayag extends beyond its immediate historical significance to provide insights into the complex relationships between humans and wildlife in rapidly changing environments. The story illustrates how individual animals can sometimes develop behaviors that bring them into severe conflict with human communities, requiring intervention to protect both human welfare and the broader wildlife populations from which such animals emerge. Today, as human populations continue to expand into wildlife habitat and climate change alters traditional animal behavior patterns, the lessons learned from historical cases like the Leopard of Rudraprayag remain relevant for managing modern human-wildlife conflicts. While current approaches emphasize prevention and coexistence rather than elimination, the need to understand and respond to exceptional individual animals that pose serious threats to human communities continues to challenge wildlife managers throughout the world. The pilgrimage routes that the leopard once terrorized have returned to their ancient rhythms, carrying millions of faithful travelers to the sacred shrines of Kedarnath and Badrinath each year. But the story of the man-eater remains part of the folklore of the region, a reminder of the time when a single leopard brought an ancient tradition to the brink of collapse and tested the courage and determination of an entire community. In the end, it took one patient hunter with deep knowledge of the mountain forests to restore peace to the sacred paths and allow the eternal pilgrimage to continue.